Hi everyone, it's Niamh here and welcome to my art journaling channel. Today I'm creating a piece for the Stencil Girl creative team and using lots of layering stencils. So I'm starting off with this large sort of Art Nouveau stencil in my 6x6 journal, and I wanted to use this to create almost like a patchwork quilt effect in my journal. So my mum's a bit of a quilter, and I was looking at a quilt she'd done recently, and this idea popped into my head, so I wanted to experiment with it to see if it worked, and I was really happy with how it worked out in the end. So you saw us use some washi tape to tape my stencil down because I'm only using part of it. I did decide that I would seal my craft paper to begin with. Now, it's not a necessary step, but the reason I did it was just in case I did have any bleed through when I was stenciling. If the paper was sealed, I could use a wet wipe or something to sort of wipe it away. So it was a preventative measure, I suppose. I also decided that I was going to start off by gessoing the layers first, so I could get a really bright colour on my finished product. So I'm just going in and drying off the stencil to see if it worked, and it did. So I'm then going to go in and pop some colour into the different parts of my stencil. So you could use a brush if you wanted to do this. I chose to use a sponge. I am more successful usually when I'm using a sponge. There are a few really small bits in here. I was able to sponge most of them pretty successfully just by sort of squeezing up my sponge to fit it in, but obviously if you've got access to some of those smaller sponges, that would be really, really helpful. So the colour palette I'm using in the background here is a Cools palette, and I'm choosing to stencil in 3 parts with the different colours. For no main reason other than when I tend to create my artworks, I just have this sort of rule of 3 in my head. I find it easier. I don't have to think very much when I do it. I just put down 3 blobs of colour. So I'm only putting out a little bit of paint as I go and spreading it out. The other thing that I am doing is I'm only using 2 sponges. I'm sort of using a bluish sponge and a greenish sponge. I'm not cleaning out between hands, so my colours are getting mixed as I go. I don't mind because they're all shades of the same colour, and it's one of the reasons I tend to sort of choose what's called analogous colours that sit together on the colour wheel, because when they blend together they're going to make shades of the same colour, so you're never going to get too much of an issue with it. When I got down to the very end, obviously I had a few odd spots, so I started putting a little bit more colour in different places, just because there are smaller little bits, and then I had some white left over, so I used that to sort of mix up some colours. So I ended up with my beautiful piece, and you could leave it just like that and get a gorgeous mosaic finish, but I wanted to add a little bit of extra detail to the piece. I'm also going in and using up all the excess paint on my palette because I hate having excess paint wasted, so I tend to either go in and stick it on another page or paint it in like this. So I'm just using the sponges I had and wiping it all together. I actually really liked how this background turned out. Very, very abstract. I was trying to do something with it today, and I just like it too much as is, so I might leave it for a little while. So once I had dried off my background, I then was looking for some other stencils that I wanted to put some pattern work into the different parts, and my idea was I was going to use warm colours on top to stand out against my different the cool colours in the background. So I'm going back and taping down my stencil in the right place again. Now you don't have to keep taking it on and off as I am. Once you've got it down in place, you can keep it in place, but you know, it's Niamh. I like to do things a difficult way. So I'm going in now with some different colours, as I said, from a warms palette, over the top to create a bit of a contrast. When you're doing this, it works really, really well. You do need to hold your second stencil down quite firmly onto your page, because obviously you've got a layer of 2 stencils. Now with something like this, I'm not particularly worried about what stencils I'm using. They're not particularly detailed, well, sorry, they are detailed stencils, but I'm using it for pattern rather than for the detail, if that makes sense. So if it doesn't quite sit on the page properly, that's fine. So be, thinking about how you're going to do it and how it's all going to work together. When I'm working particularly with a stencil like this one, obviously there's lots of different bits and pieces on this stencil that you can use. So even if you only had one stencil, you could come up with a lot of different patterns from it. So be creative in how you use it. If you have followed the Stencil Girl blog for a little while, you will notice that this sort of patterning is very like a tote bag I did around December, where I used masking tape to mask off sections, and then I put in some stenciling as well. So this is like a reduced version of that. This idea, obviously I've done it in my art journal, but it'll make a fantastic card front, or even scrapbooking page. You can use this sort of technique to decorate around and get this almost mosaic effect around your border that you're using. So as you can see, a lot of the stencils I'm choosing to do this technique, stencils have got lots of different parts to them, so I'm not using the same large area every time. I'm using something slightly different. If I do accidentally sponge into another area, as you saw there, I can just get a wet wipe or something and wipe it away. So you can be pretty ruthless with how you do this. And as I said before, you can certainly use a more detailed sponge. I know you can get the really fine detailing blending sponges that might make it really easy to get into those smaller areas. So once I'm finished, now I'm just again drying it off. Again, I had more paint on my palette, so I'm just going into that page I painted on the other side to finish that off. And this is what I quite often do on my art journaling pages, because I get 2 pages for the price of 1. So next time I'm a bit time poor, I can go in and create something on that page as well. While I was doing this, I decided I was going to do a bit of a highlight and a shadow on my little framing pieces. So I'm going in with a white pen to help pop the sections out from the background a little bit. So this works twofold. One, it helps frame the piece obviously, but also because you've done that first coat of gesso, then you may have already had a little bit of a white border there, so it makes it look deliberate. It's there for a reason. I then decided to go in and put a black shadow in as well on the opposite corners, again to sort of give a little bit of perspective, make it almost look 3D, three-dimensional in how it goes together, which I really like too. You could make that even more prominent, but once you've put the black down, using a really warm grey colour and draw a really faint grey line next to or on the craft area of the border, so it looks like it's a 3-dimensional tile. But you can sort of see there, by just putting those 2 lines, it really makes that look now like a tiled piece. The final thing that I decided to do was I wanted to put a saying or a quote on this page. So I've got the word stencil from, I think Carolyn Doobie created this one, and it's fantastic because they're all different sizes. There's lots of fantastic stuff. I just used washi tape to mask off the section I wanted to stencil, and I used my archival ink to stencil through that. I could have used paint, but just because it was so fine and I didn't want to put too much paint out, I decided to just use my ink instead. So once I had made my text quote, I decided to stick it on and actually cut it up into the 2 pieces to stick onto my little tiled journal page. So this is the finished page. As you can see in the close-up now, you can see how the shadowing and highlighting around the pieces make it look almost 3-dimensional. how the contrast between the cool colours in the background and warm colours stenciled over the top give you that really layered effect. And obviously with the quote on top ends up with a really lovely piece. And as I said before, you know, this will make a great card front, journal page. You could adapt it for scrapbooking as well. You could do it on a piece of fabric. The sky's the limit. So I hope you have a go at doing something similar to this. Check out the description box below for links to the blog post and all the links to the stencils as well. Thanks for watching. Until next time, bye for now.